Did you know that 1 in 3 people will develop cancer throughout their life? As we get older, many of us will rely on modern medicines like chemotherapy. The early days of drug discovery saw patients getting supersized injections of drugs with cursed structures, with unabsorbed arsenic often living rent-free in their butt cheeks, eating away at their tissues for weeks after treatment. How about using the color blue as a medicine? If you think this is a joke or an obsolete practice, you're in for a surprise. Let's check out some nice history and science. For most of human history, many diseases, including cancer, were treated with dubious methods like bloodletting or random herb extracts. Look at this. Ancient Persian medicine utilized asphalt residue as a remedy for wounds. Later, medieval Latin translators misinterpreted the term mumia to mean literal mummies. This sparked century-long trade and medicinal use of ground mummy powder. It was only a matter of time until some sneaky fellas started creating fake mummies by drying random corpses in the sun or in ovens. This is some next level stuff. Some ancient methods might have been quite legit though. For instance, already 2000 years ago, the Greek scientist Dioscorides used wine extracts of the autumn crocus plant to treat tumors. The synthesis enthusiasts listening will know that this plant contains the natural product colchicine, which, as was only discovered in 1938, does indeed have anti-cancer activity. Nevertheless, most treatments were indeed dubious in the past, but things started to change with the German scientist Paul Ehrlich in the late 19th century. Ehrlich studied medicine and earned his doctorate for his work on histological staining of tissues. You might have done this yourself during your studies. Very unusual for a dissertation in medicine, and this tells you about his scientific character. He went deep into the chemistry of the early aniline stains. Funnily enough, Ehrlich's cousin Carl Weigert was the first person to stain bacteria and introduce aniline dyes. These guys surely had some special scientist DNA in their family. During Ehrlich's studies, his aniline stains highlighted a specific granulate in cells that he initially believed to be known plasma cells. I'm not showing you all the details of the hard-to-translate texts, but after more investigations, he realized that he was looking at a completely new cell type. Due to their large granules, he believed that these cells nourished the surrounding tissues, dubbing them mast cells. This is incorrect, as we today know that this type of white blood cell is part of the immune system and the granules contain different chemical mediators instead of nutrients. Well, even legends can have wrong hypotheses. What does this have to do with chemotherapy? Well, another insight by Ehrlich was in vivo staining, in this case nerve cells of frogs with the dye Methylene blue. This confirmed that chemicals could interact with specific parts of cells in living organisms as well. You can see that he was eager to advance the field, wondering about the mechanisms of these differential interactions. After more research, he postulated that chemicals and antibodies can selectively target pathogens or disease rather than healthy cells. He later coined the term of magic bullets, which he's quite famous for. Given we will talk about methylene blue now, we should first check out its synthesis. This was one of the first key products of the emerging dye industry, synthesized by the German chemist Caro at BASF. This is still the largest chemical producer in the world. There would be quite a lot of history to unpack, but let's instead just check out the original synthesis from 1876. From dimethyl-aniline, it's just 3 steps. So it should be an easy task for you to predict the mechanism, right? The first conditions might remind you of diazonium synthesis. While our starting material nucleophile is different, as it's not a primary amine, the electrophile is the same. Under acidic conditions, the nitrous acid can be further protonated and decompose into the highly electrophilic nitrosyl cation. Because we have a tertiary amine, we don't have a diazo synthesis but rather an electrophilic aromatic substitution. This installs a nitroso group, so NO. In the second step, reduction with metals or other reductants reduce the nitroso group to the amine. The third step is the crux. Ferric chloride is iron 3+, so it can function as a single electron oxidant. The primary amine is more reactive than the tertiary, so we form a radical cation that is stabilized into the ring. In parallel, the excess ferric chloride also reduces the hydrogen sulfide, our second reagent. The two radicals can combine, forming one of the carbon-sulfur bonds present in methylene blue. Unsurprisingly, the imine isomerizes to restore the more stable aromatic system. The reaction doesn't stop here, as there is more than a 5-to-1 excess of ferric chloride. Checking Caro's 1876 US patent tells us he used 200 liters of some solution for roughly 10 kilograms of starting material. This means the primary amine can be oxidized again. This time, the stabilized radical lands next to the sulfur, so through yet another oxidation, a thioketone is formed. This intermediate can't isomerize to restore aromaticity, so rather, the electrophilic imine can be attacked by unreacted starting material. This brings in the second half of methylene blue, and through elimination of ammonia, one part of the bridging ring is completed. The sulfur remains pretty electron-rich due to the conjugated electron-donating group. This means it's activated for another oxidation. This creates a sulfur-based radical that can react with the other half, forming the second carbon-sulfur bond. Finally, I don't even know if we would have another oxidation and deprotonation or a simple hydrogen radical loss. In any case, the last step is clearly favored as it forms the aromatic ring in methylene blue. Pretty wild ride, but this is characteristic of much of the 19th century chemistry, which was pretty random and often based on redox chemistry madness. To understand the methylene blue story, we need to refresh our understanding of malaria. This disease is caused by parasites of the Plasmodium family, transmitted by the Anopheles mosquito as a vector. After a bite of an infected mosquito, injected spores multiply in the host's liver and subsequently invade red blood cells. They continue multiplying until the cells burst, causing fever, and enter the bloodstream. A new mosquito taking a sip of this blood can close the cycle again as the Plasmodium reproduce and form new oocysts inside the mosquito guts. What does this have to do with Ehrlich? Well, he realized that methylene blue, the same dye that he used for the staining of nerve cells, also stained the Plasmodium parasite. Ehrlich's next step was very bold, even for 1891. What effects would methylene blue have against malaria in humans? They assessed just 2 patients, but the benefits were rather remarkable. Within a few days, fevers calmed down and pathogens cleared from the blood. This was the very first synthetic, rather than natural compound ever used in clinical therapy, marking the advent of chemotherapy. As Ehrlich put it, of course, this means that the urine, full of excess methylene blue, you guessed it, turned blue as well. In feces, the compound is excreted in its reduced state. This leucoform is colorless due to the absence of the conjugated donor-acceptor pi system. However, exposure to air can oxidize it again, regenerating the dark blue color. But how can a simple dye affect mighty parasites? Well, this redox activity is essential for 2 mechanisms. The first one operates with the oxidized methylene blue. Because it likes to get reduced again, it can compete at an enzyme of Plasmodium that is supposed to reduce the sulfur group of oxidized glutathione to a thiol in normal glutathione. This unnatural competition essentially inhibits this enzyme, leading to accumulation of oxidized glutathione that the parasite can't get rid of, increasing harmful oxidative stress. The second mechanism relates to hemoglobin, the protein in our red blood cells responsible for carrying oxygen. You will likely know that it features an iron 2+ ion, which is where the oxygen molecules attach to. The parasite digests this protein, but is not a real fan, because both the individual iron and the heme groups cause oxidative damage, similar to what we've just seen with glutathione. The sneaky parasites have evolved food vacuoles and enzyme machinery that convert the toxic heme to an insoluble crystal polymer, so-called hemozoin. This degradation prevents the parasite's death, but importantly, for some reason it starts from the oxidized form of hemoglobin with an iron 3+. This is called methemoglobin. This is where methylene blue kicks in. Remember the colorless form? This reduced system can easily give away its newly found electrons to reduce the iron 3 plus in methemoglobin to iron 2 plus. This regenerates hemoglobin and prevents the initiation of the parasite's sneaky plan. It can avoid the oxidative stress from excess iron 2 plus and the heme ligands. This means its replication is suppressed. Using the color blue to treat disease. Maybe this reminds you of the ancient practices of ground up mummy powder. But check this out. Methylene blue is still a legit medicine, as it's approved by the FDA for treatment of acquired methemoglobinemia. This condition can be caused by other drugs that increase oxidative stress, leading to oxidation of normal hemoglobin and thus high levels of methemoglobin in the blood. The oxidized form of iron 3 plus has a lower affinity to O2, so methemoglobin has a lower oxygen carrying capacity. In severe cases, the effects can even be lethal. Methylene blue works the same way again. It's reduced to its leucoform, which can reduce methemoglobin to hemoglobin. This time, instead of messing with the malaria parasite, it allows for recovery of the patient's oxygen transport. It works pretty well for this case, and I think it's pretty insane that the first synthetic compound ever tested in the clinic is still used in humans today. On the other hand, use in malaria did not take off because other compounds like quinine proved more effective. However, research has continued to show that combinations with methylene blue are still effective. On this chart, you can see the proportion of malaria patients that are infectious after 0, 2 or 7 days. The third set of columns is a combination of two drugs which on their own are not too effective. The patients that received methylene blue on top of these two drugs were non-infectious after day 2. That's pretty remarkable. By the way, how do you think the researchers were able to tell if a patient was infectious or not? They simply offered their blood as a meal to new mosquitoes. Remember the malaria cycle. If the patients remain infectious, the mosquitoes would unfortunately see some nasty plasmodium deposits in their guts, which can be detected. Before we get to the bot eating, I wanted to thank all of my channel members for their continued support and thank you for watching this video. If you're new to the channel or for some strange reason have not liked the video and subscribed yet, please consider doing so. When not turning people blue, Ehrlich experimented with several other dyes and, as was in fashion back in the day, swapped out most of his diet for strong cigars. But more importantly, he was busy with pioneering the field of immunology, including the discovery of the complement immune system. This was just one of his many contributions that ultimately netted him the Nobel Prize in 1908. As many of you know, this system consists of protein precursors circulating in the blood which support the killing of foreign cells. Nowadays, we know that complement is implicated in many diseases that have an immune component, so many modern medicines aim to regulate this system. Ehrlich continued with a breakthrough in drug discovery. This time, the gruesome STD, syphilis, was his next quest. Looking at its devastating effects, it becomes clear why it was one of the largest public health burdens between the 16th and 19th century. Finally, in 1905, two German scientists identified the coil-shaped Treponema bacteria as the culprits behind disease transmission. Ehrlich's concept was again put to the test. Would he be able to find a chemical that selectively harms the bacteria while not compromising the patient's health? This second part, not harming patients, is obviously important. The old school standard of care was treatment with mercury through intramuscular injections or other ways. Because doctors were enthusiastic in their use and accurate dosing of things like mercury fumes is impossible, the supposed cure often proved worse than the disease. If mercury can't help, how about arsenic compounds? Said no sane scientist ever. Nevertheless, the compound atoxyl came into the spotlight of antibiotic research. It had shown promising effects for sleeping sickness, which is yet another disease you might have heard of, transmitted by the infamous tsetse fly. Atoxyl was believed to be not harmful, hence its name, but larger testing in patients by the German physician Koch caused blindness in 2% of cases. Shouldn't surprise you that this compound might be dangerous. Ehrlich was asked if he could do something with atoxyl to make it more benign while still maintaining its efficacy. Well, the first problem to solve is, what is atoxyl? You see, atoxyl was synthesized by the French chemist Béchamp in 1854. This guy had just found a pretty pioneering reduction of nitrobenzene to synthesize aniline. Playing around with his product, he thought addition of arsenic acid gave the anilide form, stemming from nucleophilic addition of the nitrogen. However, after Ehrlich's co-worker Bertheim spent enough time working on the compound, he corrected the structure, corresponding to an electrophilic aromatic substitution in Béchamp's reaction. In these good old days, structures were often determined by assessing reactivity. Amongst other experiments, they found that atoxyl underwent diazo formation with nitrous acid, similar to the reaction we've seen in methylene blue, but this reaction would be impossible for the substituted anilide structure. Having figured out what atoxyl actually was, Bertheim and Ehrlich systematically modified and tested over 1,000 compounds. One of them was compound 606, which they assumed contained an arsenic-arsenic double bond. This agent did not work against sleeping sickness, but some years later, through some serendipity and the involvement of the expert Japanese bacteriologist Sahashiro Hata, they found promising effects against syphilis. Hata diligently tested the compound over and over in mice, then guinea pigs, and then rabbits, confirming its benefit and even prophylactic effects. Obviously, they knew about the Paracelsus quote of "the dose makes the poison," so they investigated the effective dose versus the maximally tolerated dose. For their time, the preclinical research was very systematic and thoughtful. The side effects were better compared to atoxyl, with severe neurological problems like vision loss not occurring. However, direct subcutaneous injections did cause pain and necrosis, so unintended cell death in the skin and other tissues. Keep this in mind. To avoid the mistakes made by Koch, the German physician who blinded people with atoxyl, Ehrlich arranged carefully recorded clinical studies giving guidance on dose and selection of patients himself. The human tests proved successful, with much of the medical community deeming this a breakthrough. It was sold as Salvarsan in 1910, but was unfortunately not the optimal one-time magic bullet chemotherapy that Ehrlich had hoped for. The first issue was that Salvarsan was an unstable solid and prone to oxidation, requiring dissolution for IV infusions or subcutaneous injections. As you might tell from its structure, Salvarsan is not particularly hydrophilic, so its solubility in water is very limited. This meant injections were slow and painful. The injected volumes were initially 10 times more than what some of you might know from at-home auto-injectors today. Doctors tried to find nicer liquids, but as you can see, some of them caused even more pain, requiring the use of narcotics. Remember the necrosis which Hata identified? Well, that was also an issue. I found it particularly disgusting that the injections often led to deposits that remained unabsorbed. Basically, arsenic living rent-free in their butt cheeks, leading to greenish-yellow areas in their ass. Yikes. General toxicity was also still a risk. Aside from low tolerability causing issues like diarrhea, this case report describes a patient becoming deaf. At least this was less common than the blindness triggered by Koch's atoxyl trials. No wonder did Ehrlich famously state the challenge of translation from research to real-world settings. Let's conclude the Ehrlich saga with 3 interesting chemistry insights. First, just 2 years later in 1912, Neosalvarsan was launched. As you can tell, the sulfonate group increases solubility in water and conveniently also shelf life by reducing oxidation of Salvarsan. It's pretty remarkable that the world's first designed drug also saw the world's first next-generation molecule trying to make the original better. This is definitely more innovative than deuterium copycats, for example, as we've seen in our previous video. The second insight relates to why Salvarsan, despite generally being decently safe, still showed variable toxicity between different batches of product. You see, Ehrlich cooked up a precursor featuring a nitro and arsenic acid together with dithionite as a reducing agent. This simultaneously reduced the nitro group and arsenic and gave the condensed product. This synthesis was not always reproducible and resulted in sulfur-containing impurities that were likely not always removed to the same degree. The isolation was just a conversion to the dihydrochloride salt, followed by immediate filling into inert vials or ampules due to the low stability. So, depending on the chemist's rigor and luck, the drug product injected into patients might not have been the cleanest. As the field was exploring modified syntheses, it was found that a dithionite reduction at low temperatures instead of 60 degrees selectively reduced just the nitro group. This allowed an additional purification step with charcoal and crystallization. Then, in a second step, reduction with hypophosphorus acid gave Salvarsan. The product obtained in this manner was much more pure and accordingly less toxic. I don't know what they used for large-scale manufacturing down the line, but I hope not too many people lost their hearing. Our third insight to wrap up the video relates to the drug's structure. We've drawn the arsenic-arsenic double bond several times now, but this structural element proposed by Ehrlich was actually debated for long. Due to its properties, Salvarsan proved too tricky to be characterized with old-school methods. Crystals were not suited for X-ray analysis, and traditional mass spectrometry did not work due to its very low volatility. Only in 2005, chemists managed to solve the mystery by using electrospray ionization mass spec. Check this out. The profile does not look like something you want to inject into humans. It turns out that Salvarsan actually consists of different cyclic species in solution, with 3 and 5-membered cycloarsenes being preferred. I think it's hilarious that the first synthetic drug discovered by humanity looks devilish as heck. But even funnier is the following. Despite the systematic modification and medicinal chemistry work from Ehrlich that we've covered, Salvarsan is actually not the active agent in the body. Instead, it is oxidized and serves as a delayed release source of the monomeric aryl arsenic acid. Exposure to air and water converts most of the different sized rings to the active drug after some time. The cursed arsenic drug is not used against syphilis today because the discovery of other agents like penicillin in the mid-20th century made it obsolete. Mummy corpses are also not regularly violated anymore. But as you now know, our modern arsenal of medicines also still features methylene blue. In one of our next videos, we will take a look at other random, even crazier compounds that were used as drugs. I can tell you, you will not want to miss that one. If you haven't seen my other videos, you should check them out. Thanks again for supporting this channel, and I will see you in the next one.